Welcome to the Knowledge for Men show. Your life will never be the same.
Your level of success will seldom exceed your level of personal development.
I want to die empty of regret. I want to die empty of my best work. We don't understand who we are. Instead, we're living out somebody else's narrative.
What one man can do, another man can do. If it's been done, it can be done again.
Being yourself and being your truest, most authentic self in every moment. If it scares you or makes you a little afraid, do it. Follow your heart and your gut.
The first stage, I think, is finding you, like finding out who I am today.
Stuff will not work. You will have things that fail. Success is when you're a happy, fulfilled person. How do you define success?
It's your life, and you are the creator of the movie script that is your life story.
Hey guys, just wanted to offer you a free gift here as a part of being a listener of my show. If you go to kfmfree.com, you can get the top 30 books and top 30 success quotes that every man must live by. So obviously every show we talk about books and we talk about success quotes. And so I've compiled the best of the best out of the last 100 episodes into a short guide. So kfmfree.com and it's all yours. All right, guys, welcome to the show. I'm here with Kris Wolfe, founder of goodguyswag.com, where he helps men lead, be more successful, and live with integrity. And in this episode, we'll be talking about 10 ways to win a woman's heart. But before we do, Kris, happy to have you here.
Thank you so much, Andrew. I appreciate it. And the book, by the way, just in case you end up looking for the book, is 10 Ways to Win a Girl's Heart. But we'll make it woman's heart for this episode today.
All right. Sounds good. And let's dive in now with a favorite success quote, some sort of saying that you've lived by, and how that's helped you on your journey to get to where you are now today.
Well, the quote I really love comes from Gordon Dalby, and he actually wrote the foreword to my book, and he's been a mentor to me. But his quote is, "A real man is a man who is real." And I love that, just the authenticity and the transparency.
Yeah. Do you think that that's something that you were lacking when you're growing up as a young man, and it's something that you've adopted?
Yeah, I think it really was something I lacked as a young man. I come from a family. In fact, almost all of my family, they're all hunters. They're, D1 football players, baseball players. And I never quite felt like I matched up to my family standard. In fact, I was kind of the brainiac of the family. And I kind of excelled in completely different areas. No one in my family, I did track and field, they all did baseball. So growing up, I really never felt like I met that man standard. But what was kind of cool is that when I stopped trying to put on a front, when I finally just accepted myself as I am, I kind of ended up finding that I actually had those same leadership qualities, the same athletic gifts, and some of the same talents. Not too long ago, I went clay shooting with my family, and they were all laughing, thinking that I live in LA, that I was going to be an LA guy, and I smoked all of them. It was awesome.
All right. What did you mean by not meeting that man standard? Who created that?
I think that society sometimes has some standards for men in general of what a man is supposed to be. There is the whole concept of the Marlboro man kind of being the distant guy, and kind of being the guy that doesn't really show any emotion or really show himself. So I think even that quote from Gordon that just kind of frees us up to be real, and just to be real with other men allows us to really make the man that's inside of us come out, if you will.
Yeah. What would be some good examples of areas where men typically aren't very real, and where they could really work on?
Well, I think, first of all, sometimes we're not very real between each other. I lead a men's group here in LA. And when one guy leads the charge and actually kind of shares some of his stories, is authentic, maybe even shares some of the hurts from his past, it's amazing how many other guys will start to open up, and how it will really create this really strong atmosphere. Sometimes you look at women and the relationships that they have, and we kind of think of us men as lone wolves, as you will, even though my last name is Wolfe. But you look at men as lone wolves, and when in reality, I think that the bond that can be created between men is actually even the strongest once we can let our guards down.
Yeah, I think that right there is the challenge for a man, to let his guard down. I think for many men, it could be viewed as a sign of weakness when it's clear that it's not. But what are your thoughts on men being more vulnerable, more real and authentic in the relationship with kind of strength and masculinity?
Well, and I think for me personally, that was really tough. Like I said, I didn't really feel like I lived up to this ideal, and I don't really have a family. You know, we're not really touchy feely. In general, the men are very analytical, and that's just the way that our family is. You know, you tough it out. You don't show any emotion. You put your boots on and you get to work. You know, and you don't complain. And there's still some parts of that I think are good. But I think for me, even when I was in high school and even I was in theater, which once again was not like the rest of the men in my family. But I think when it really gave me a chance, and I never really fully embraced it, but I think when I got into college and I found such a close group of friends, and I finally was able to kind of just break down the doors and just say, like, you know what, I don't really think of myself as being a man sometimes, and you know, just like the shame that I was carrying on my shoulders. I think once I was kind of able to let that go is when I really kind of found my true leader calling. And it's amazing, really, the turnaround that I had from the man I was in high school to the man that I was in college. I ended up starting a fraternity and started lifting weights and just became a leader on campus. And that wasn't who I was in high school. In fact, and I apologize for talking on and on, but this past weekend we were at this conference, and it was a huge conference. It's called Urbana in St. Louis, about 17,000 people. And my wife and I were walking out of the stadium, and I hear my name called out. And it ended up being this guy who I haven't seen since I was 18. And his name was Dan Kennedy, so I'll have to forward this to him. But he was one of my mentors when I was a freshman in college. He was a senior. And he was like, man, Kris, he's like, it's just amazing to look at your life and just to see how you've transformed. And then my wife was like, wanted to ask questions about who I was. And he was like, oh my gosh, Kris used to be this skinny, awkward guy.
You're like, don't tell her. We should already put a ring on it. Okay. So how would you, this is interesting right there. Like this transformation, this guy says this is actually good. You know, where you're going here. I'm wondering, how did this growth impact your dating life and your relationships? Yeah, we could actually go into 10 ways to win a woman's heart. I'm starting at this point, but I'm wondering, like, what was it like before when you were more closed and guarded to when you started opening up and taking off that mask and being more you, being the authentic Kris Wolfe?
Yeah, and you know what? That's actually primarily what the book is about, 10 Ways to Win a Girl's Heart. Okay. It's not really a set of techniques. It's kind of my story, my transition from going from that skinny, awkward kid in high school to ending up where I am the man now. And I would really say that it was the mentors and the people that I allowed into my life that helped to grow and shape me. So, you know, my wife, she jokes around because, you know, she was like, you have so many mentors in my life, but you know, even though I'm in my later 30s, I still consider it imperative in my life to have men that still speak into me and shape me and help me become a better man. Now, my process isn't done yet.
Yeah. And so you got a lot of mentors, like different. Do you have a mentor for like different aspects of your life, like a business mentor, like a health mentor? Like what do you have all these different mentors for, and how do these relationships work?
Yeah, and you know, something that I always tell younger guys, I'm like, don't take advice from someone that doesn't show success in the area that you're seeking. It's usually the people that have the least success that are the most vocal. But, you know, it's always kind of the quiet ones that actually have the best wisdom to share and who really have demonstrated the best success. So, yeah, absolutely. You know, when it's come to my writing and this area of my life and even leading a men's group, I definitely look to Gordon Dalby. You know, he was a pioneer of the men's movement. You know, I have a mentor. His name is Phil Hotzenpiller. He really has just poured into my wife and I's life. You know, he has an amazing marriage with his wife, and we go down and we spend weekends with them, and just to see how it's modeled, just to be around people who have strong character, just to see how they do their lives helps you to model your life after them.
Yeah. And how do you maintain these relationships, like with all these different mentors?
Well, it takes effort. It takes time. Even for my men's group here in LA, I have a mentor. His name is Jim Meany, and he used to be the vice president of this organization called Young Life. It's just really being humble and thankful and just, I think, wanting to be taught. Something I think a lot of guys don't realize out there is there are older guys who want to mentor and teach. And so I think it's just a matter of being bold and finding them, and also being consistent in communication with them and getting to know them. With Gordon, we just talked yesterday, and we scheduled a time 2 weeks from now to talk again.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. The thing with mentors, I feel like there's just so much value. Someone's already gone through so much of the path and the journey, and to be able to sit down and talk with them and guide you to course correct the path that you're on, it could just save you a tremendous amount of time and frustration, ultimately.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the book, 10 Ways to Win a Girl's Heart, which I didn't really specifically mention Dan Kennedy, but he's definitely part of this group of senior guys that took me underneath their wings when I was a freshman in college. And it was really because of them that my life started to change so dramatically.
Yeah. Yeah. And so is this one of the 10 ways to win a woman's heart, is having male role models and mentors in your life?
Yeah. It kind of falls under this whole concept of be a gentleman. And the quote actually for that chapter came from this movie Macintosh. And it basically says that, you can't be a gentleman if you don't believe yourself to be a man. I actually am trying to look for it right now, but I'll have to find that a little bit later. But it's a great quote, and I think there's a lot of truth in that too.
Yeah. Okay. And feel free, go ahead and you just dive into these 10 ways of how to win women's heart.
Well, to give you a background on the story too. I started this website, goodguyswag.com, and it all arose because my wife was blogging, and my wife was Miss USA a few years ago. And I just kind of asked her one night. Like, wow.
So your wife is Miss USA.
She was Miss USA 2009. Yeah.
All right. So that's awesome. And right now, just saying that, and would you ever imagine yourself saying that you married Miss USA when you were younger?
I would have had no clue. I would have had no idea that would have happened. And I think that's why, for me, I always looked to myself when I was younger, and what kind of advice would I have needed at that point in my life? So that's kind of where it all started. Her and I were on a hike one night, and she was doing this whole phenomenon called blogging. I was like, you know what? I'm going to give it a try too. So I just said, hey, what were the things that I did to win your heart? Because, I was a skinny, awkward kid, and now here I am, married to Miss USA. And she started listing them off, and I started taking notes in my phone as we were walking. And I got back that night, and I wrote an article called 10 Ways to Win a Girl's Heart. It ended up going viral. And then a few months later, I thought, you know what? I'm going to turn this into a book. So I started to kind of work in that direction about, 2.5 years ago.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of guys are like, all right, well, what are the 10 ways to win a woman's heart? How do I get Miss USA, 2016? So go ahead and take the mic and share with us, what were those things?
Well, in her words, she basically told me, number one, of course, be a gentleman. And so these are each of the chapters. Chapter 2 is be clear on what you want. Number 3, be pursuant. Number 4, be intentional. Chapter 5, be complimentary. Chapter 6, be creative. Chapter 7, be her advocate. Chapter 8, be attentive. Chapter 9, be protective. And Chapter 10, be romantic. So those were some of the things that she told me that I did that really won her heart over. And I turned each of those into a chapter.
Yeah. And based on those 10, it's like, I think a lot of guys are like, oh, there's nothing in there I haven't heard before. And I'm not saying that's not good. What I'm saying is sometimes it's those simple things that we've often overlooked.
Yeah, it is. And actually, it's funny because I was, Gordon, he helped me edit the book. And when we were going through it, he was like, every day we got on the phone for 2 hours and we went through the book line by line by line. We finished up the first go around and I thought, wow, we're done now. And He's like, oh, no. Now we jump into we go through this a second time. And then after we finished the second time, he was about ready to go through it a third time. And I was like, Gordon, I got to get this book out there. But I think the good thing about it was that I was able to go through. And I remember one night, my wife was a little bit upset at me, and I started going through one of the chapters on the book, and I kind of used, like you said, kind of one of those simple things that we often overlook that are ultimately very important. And I took a little cue, and I actually said something to her, and it was just crazy how much she melted. I was like, okay, well, I got to read this book a few more times again.
Yeah. I'm actually looking here at the article, and so looking at like be pursuant. How do you draw that line between be pursuant and where it just becomes like, all right, now I'm starting to become creepy. This isn't working.
Right. And you know what? I kind of decipher a little bit on that. I have, what's the difference between the green light excuse, there's like excuses, because definitely as I started to pursue Kristen, I got turned down probably 5 times before she finally agreed to go out with me. And so I kind of...
Is that like you're calling her and you're asking her out and she's like, no, I'm busy? Is it like that? Is that what you mean?
Yeah. She would just always had an excuse. Yeah. And she
has to go to see her aunt for some reason, and like just all
yeah. If you're not careful, then those excuses will continue to go on. And so, I knew that I had this green light excuse, which I talk about in the book. But, I finally just... After 5 times, I knew that she had some interest there, but I knew that
what's the green light excuse? Is that like she's saying no, but she's still interested?
Yeah. Where she has an excuse, but she says, maybe next weekend, or right. She has it, but I know so many guys that give up at that point. So many guys that are like, oh, she's not interested in me. And I go, well, what did she say to you? And it's really just kind of, I was like, no, man, I think she's actually still interested in you. If she just says like, hey, Tuesdays are my girls' night. Well, guess what? Maybe Tuesdays are our girls' night and you need to ask her to do something on Wednesday. But then, if she says like maybe next weekend, and then the next weekend you call her up and she says maybe next weekend, then that's kind of the never-ending excuse. But some of the deadly rejections that I talk about is, she says I'm not ready for a relationship right now. That's obvious. She's still talking about her ex, and she's talking about other guys. Those are obviously some cues that maybe she's not interested in you.
Yeah. And when you say be a gentleman, such a broad type of term, what would you say is your definition? Like, what is your view? What are some values of the gentleman?
Well, and like I said, I purposely did that. And I would say that's the biggest chapter too. It's a lot about my own personal journey at this point.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I would say that be a gentleman is really just understanding who you are as a man, and really accepting yourself as a man. And then also, and then just kind of like some fine tuning things that you can do. We always kind of, and by the way, I found that quote from John Wayne and McIntosh. I end up pulling this quote from theartofmanliness.com, but he said, you've got to be a man first before you can be a gentleman. And I thought that was such a great quote. So I just really talked about how being with these mentors and being with these other people in my life that really helped to grow and shape me, I was able to kind of find my own unique manhood in the middle of that,
Yeah, I like that. I like that. I think everyone really does have their own version, their own. It's like owning yourself is what like. There's not just like one set of rules that you have to follow. It's like you kind of have to carve your own path and become your own man.
Yeah, and I think even on the flip side, we end up having expectations of what a gentleman is, and we get them confused. And I actually address that in the book too. We think we have to have a well-fitted suit, and we have to wear a bow tie, we have to have a classy car, and we have to do things like open doors for ladies, which are I'm not saying that they're discounted. It's just that's not the heart behind it. So you don't have to have an Ivy League degree. You don't have to volunteer. You don't have to have righteous living. First and foremost, you have to believe yourself to be a man in your heart. And out of that, those things come naturally. It's not something you have to strive and work so hard to do.
Yeah. Got it. And When you say be intentional, can you elaborate a little bit more? That was one of your points, like be intentional.
Yeah, well, I think the reason why is because, here I am, like I said, I'm in my late 30s. It took me a while to kind of grow up, and I cite this one story. I met this girl one time, and we, I ended up hanging out with her that night. I got her number, and I actually never called her back again. And so this is this whole phenomenon called ghosting, and I describe it. I see guys do this all the time where they're actually hanging out with a girl, and then all of a sudden they're too scared to tell her it's not working out, so they just kind of jump ship. So it's kind of being intentional. Number one, being intentional in how you pursue her and tell her, like, look, I really enjoy spending time with you. I want to spend time with you next week too. But it's also saying, if things aren't working out, to be intentional and say, hey, this is not working, and I don't think I can see myself with you down the road. But a lot of times guys are scared to do both of those.
Yeah. And maybe the latter, which is like letting a girl know that it's not working. Sometimes they'll just kind of go with the flow because it's too hard to back out. And then months go by, years go by, and it's like you've already invested so much time together that it makes it even harder in many cases to break up.
Yeah, I understand. I went through that. I was in a relationship 3 years, and things were comfortable. Things weren't bad at all. But I knew ultimately this was not the girl that I wanted to be with. But I just kept on dragging it out because number one, I didn't want to hurt her feelings. And number two, I kept on trying to make excuses for myself and saying, it's not that bad.
Yeah, right. I think those two, it's like you don't want to hurt her. And two, you kind of think like, is the grass greener on the other side? You're like, is it, maybe it's good here where I water it. Is it going to be better over there? And also, too, maybe the fear of the unknown. Like, holy shit, I'm going to be single, like no sex, all that stuff kind of comes in.
Yeah, and I think that's so, sometimes when we hear that word intentional, it has so much connotation behind it. But really, when it comes down to it, it's just being honest. Yeah.
Being honest. Okay. All right. And, man, a lot of these are very simple. I'm curious, when I say simple, simple yet effective, but I'm curious your take on like be romantic. Like, what are some things that you've done? I think like kind of romantic and you have one where it's be creative. In many ways go together. I'm curious on like what is your take on these two here?
Yeah, and I kind of divided them into two chapters because I think being creative is number one, acknowledging that you're a creative being. You're a creative person. That we are all meant to have some creativity within us. And I even go through it, talk about, even the concept of us having jobs and earning an income. It's a rudimentary form of creativity, but it still shows that we have creativity. And then, so that's just kind of like a building block to getting to this part about being romantic. And then when I get into being romantic, I really just talk about the heart, and I go through this whole idea of the romantic period in the 1800s, which really kind of gave rise to this freedom of self-expression. And we still, even though that was from the 1800s and it was a movement that started then, it's still something that guys have difficulty doing now. And so it just talks about, like maybe opening up and looking into to art and then talking about doing things that are unexpected and thoughtful and uncommon.
Yeah. What would you say are some examples that you've done that really demonstrate that?
So I talk about specifically in the book, I talk about just kind of it's uncommon. So my wife, she's a huge Disney fan. She sings that Frozen song all the time. It's living in this house with her. She sings musical theater all the time. And I don't know any of these songs, and I really have no ambition to partake in these songs, but I know that this is her passion. So last year for her birthday, what I did is I kind of organized this kind of magical princess weekend for her. And we ended up going up to Hearst Castle and I got us like horse rides on the beach and kind of just, I know a lot of this stuff sounds expensive, but I think there's also, things that we can do on a very simple level. And I talk a little bit about that too. So, in fact, I actually can't take credit for it this year, but once again, since my wife is a big princess fan, one of my buddies helped me organize a birthday party for this year, and we showed up, and he had he had like crowns for her to wear, for everyone to wear, and he had like a princess banner when she walked in, and it was playing Disney music, and she melted. It was what she loved.
Wow, yeah, it seems really putting a lot of creativity and thought into these events here. That's really exciting. Yeah, so going really well, this interview and the questions, and I think a lot of guys are getting a ton of value with this. What do you think are some of the reasons why guys just don't do some of these things here? Like, because they're simple. It's like I'm listening. It's like, yeah, of course, like that makes sense. What are some reasons why guys just aren't doing those things?
I think once again, it's just because we get comfortable and we get set in our ways, and so even though you're right, there's simple things, but they're things that we stop considering and things that we stop taking into account. Like maybe, like I said, once again, I'm in my upper 30s, but I think that so many years of just living life, I end up saying, well, this is the way I do things, and this is the way things have worked for me. But once you get into a relationship, that shifts, that changes a little bit. You got to kind of start to think beyond what you've always known.
Yeah, you kind of just, I like that, thinking beyond what you've always known.
And like I said, when it comes down to it, once again, it comes down to me having mentors and being teachable.
Yeah, I think you got some good points there with like being fixed in your own ways. Like, this is what I've always done, but if we keep doing what you've always done, you're always going to get what you've always gotten. And sometimes I like that you have an open mindset to learning new things. It's really good. Let's take it a step deeper and go into the knowledge round. Just going to ask you some rapid fire questions here, Kris.
Yeah.
All right, guys, if you're not reading books, then you're getting left behind. Somebody spent their entire life learning some invaluable lesson. And the best format that anyone could ever put it in is a book. It's the shortest, fastest, simplest way to consume content. So I know there are so many books available, and we talk about books all the time on the podcast. So there must be so many running through your head, and you're wondering, where do I begin? Well, I've compiled the top 30 books and success quotes from all of my guests in the last 100 episodes. So you can get them all for free. If you go to kfmfree.com, you can simply download the top 30 books that every man must live by. Again, that's kfmfree.com. Welcome to the Knowledge Round, where the guests will be asked rapid-fire questions to give the audience invaluable pieces of wisdom to help transform their lives. Starting in 3, 2, 1, showtime. Yeah. Cool. So first question I have for the Knowledge Round is, even before this episode, we were chatting a bit, and throughout this episode here, learning more about you and what drives you. And it really seems like you have a sense of purpose on what you're doing, and even doing a lot of work that it's just because you care and you have like a big passion with the work you're doing. Like, what advice would you give to someone who is feeling lost and doesn't have that?
I think that's really easy. Number one is just not losing hope. I mean, it's interesting because right before I met Kristen, especially once you get into your mid 30s and you start thinking, gosh, I still have not met, the woman I'm going to marry. You start to lose hope and you kind of think that the future looks dark, but in reality, she was just around the corner. So I would just say to every guy out there not to lose hope. And even just that alone, keeping the hope alive, will help everything else fall into place.
Yeah, that is a big fear. I mean, your 30s, but even still, there might be a few guys in their 40s and 50s and beyond in that situation. So how long ago was it when you first met this girl and to where you are now? Or you guys are, I'm not sure how long you guys have been married, but how long ago did this relationship start?
So we've been married almost 3 years now. So, okay. And we met and things fell quickly. I like I said, I had been in a relationship in my early 30s. We were together for 3 years and it wasn't moving anywhere. It was like we were on a never ending carousel. But when I met Kristen, something was different. And I actually knew. I was like, you know what, this is my time that I really need to whip myself into gear. And we got engaged within 6 months.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you just knew.
I just knew. And it wasn't so much that. I think I also was like, man, I just found this girl and she's like the most rarest and precious of jewels and I'm not going to let her go.
Yeah. I like that. That's really awesome. Happy for you on that. And what would you say was holding you back from becoming the man you are now today?
Like I said, I think for me, it was just a feeling of shame for a lot of my life and not feeling that I measured up. In reality, I was trying so hard in high school to fit in. You know, I thought I had to wear the right clothes. I had to drive the right car. I had to know the right people. But in reality, if I would have just been more rooted and confident in myself, then I would have just naturally brought the people that I actually needed in my life.
Yeah, I like that. And what would you say are 3 of your most influential books that have helped you on your journey, and why?
I'll go back again to Gordon Dalby. This is actually how we met in the first place. I read his book, Healing the Masculine Soul. And I ended up just emailing him saying, hey, I wanted to, and I read this book right before I met Kristen too. And I was like, hey, I just want to let you know that your book absolutely changed my life. And then we just ended up, creating this email correspondence. And that was, maybe even 4 years ago. So I would say that book. I would say, I don't know if you've heard of Robert Glover's book, No More Mr. Nice Guy, but that's an incredible book. I definitely draw on that book even for this. And then, and when I think we mentioned earlier, just John Eldredge, Wild at Heart. All 3 of those books had a lot of impact on me.
We alluded to this just a little bit earlier. You said what were some of the things that I would want to, that if I can go back in time, tell myself. And so I got this scenario here for you. And so imagine you have 60 seconds with your 20-year-old self. What would you tell 20-year-old Kris to do? And what would you tell 20-year-old Kris not to do?
Well, I would really just say, hey, hey, Kris, I want you to stay on this path that you're on. And I know that it seems like a narrow road sometimes, and it seems like there's some wider and easier paths that would seem convenient to go down. But I would just say, stay on this narrow path and never lose sight of who you are as a man. And really never lose sight too. And this is kind of going to go into a place where maybe a lot of guys, my dad was really busy, always was working so hard to provide for our family. But also just looking through my family history and looking at the patterns. My dad and my uncle were both fraternity presidents, and my grandpa, he was really involved in the Masons, and he was involved in the Shriners. I have a leadership gift in my family, and just to even tell myself, hey, Kris, you're a leader. I really believe in you.
Yeah, that's good. And moving along, even if you have to summarize some of your main points, what would you say is your philosophy on life and success?
I would say that once again, to be teachable, to find great mentors around you who can help take you to point A to point B. And I think that's something I really love too, by the way, is just I love walking into an AA meeting. I don't know if I'm not an alcoholic, but I really love what they do and how they transform people. I think the first thing that they acknowledge is they just say, I can't do this on my own. And so I think that was the main takeaway that I had for me, is just to surrender and be like, you know what? I can't do this on my own. I can fight as much as I want, but I need to be bringing other people into this picture.
Yeah, I like that. At first I was like, where are you going with this? I was like, but yeah, you cleaned it up, and that is a good point. And you're right. You're absolutely right about any type of 12-step program. It's acceptance that you can't do this alone, and that you do have a challenge in front of you. Really good. So that's going to end the knowledge round there. So just curious, we got a new year here. What's exciting you today? What are you really excited for here in the new year?
Well, a bunch of stuff on the horizon. Like I said, the 10 Ways to Win a Girl's Heart becomes available on Amazon. It actually becomes available on February 3rd, I believe. So it's available for pre-order right now. And the ebook is available. And so I'm really excited about that. And then, my wife and I, we've been going around and doing some speaking. I really enjoy going to universities and speaking. And I think we're actually heading out to Texas here. And yeah, just kind of the dreaming that we get to do together. In fact, we got together early this morning, and she had already written down a list of things that we wanted to accomplish for 2016. So it's kind of fun to dream and plan with a wife. And I think a lot of people too, by the way, I was going to say, a lot of people feel like once they get married, that will slow them down. But I feel like I've accomplished more things since I've been with my wife than without. We've been able to do so many things. I woke up this morning and I do sales for my full-time job, and I found I'm number 1 in the country. And I was like, how incredible is this? We're busier than ever, and yet I'm more successful in these other areas of my life.
Yeah, that is a big point right there. And yeah, congratulations on the sales, but the idea that, like, you know, I want to be single so that I can really pursue the things I want in my life is kind of a topic that you know, it's a reason for being single so that they can, you know, focus on their career, their professional, or their ambitions and passions. But what I'm just getting from you, what I'm picking up is, if you find the right person, it can actually magnify your efforts.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there's also, I was actually heard this quote last night, but it said, with great expectation comes great preparation. So I still think it's important for guys to prepare, but I think that when you find an amazing girl and then to say like, oh, I want to accomplish these things in my life first. Well, you know, there's a lot of studies out there too that show that actually, I think married men are more successful, believe it or not, which I was really surprised by, because I lived under that concept for so many years. I was like, I don't have time for marriage. I'm too busy. I want to be number 1 in my company. And yet I was working so hard and not getting there. And now I'm at a place where I'm doing more than ever and finding more success in my sales career.
Yeah. Congratulations. Do you feel like being married to, you know, former Miss USA, does this encourage you to like rise to the occasion, to like really be the best version of yourself? Like it's like, I've got to do it.
You know what? I think the great thing about our relationship too is I feel so lucky to be with her, but she also feels really lucky to be with me. So I think as long as we kind of keep that at the forefront, and as I always acknowledge and remember, wow, I'm really lucky to be married to Kristen, and actually that I need to continue to date her as well, because I think a lot of guys sometimes get married and just give up on the whole dating thing. But I'm still pursuing her now, and I'll continue to pursue her for the rest of my life, hopefully.
Yeah, that's great. We'll end it on that note, but that's a big point there. I have a book. It's called The Dating Playbook for Men. So guys in their relationships will be like, oh, I'm in a relationship. You know, I've been married. I don't need to get your book. But I say, like, no, this is even more important for you than a single guy, because you're never supposed to stop dating. You're whether you're in a relationship or you're married, it's never ending.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you bring up a good point. I think it's even more important once you're married to continue to explore and to be a better dater, because that's what's going to keep that relationship alive. And, you know, like, I feel like I'm the leader in our relationship, but I feel like I'm the driving force. So, you know, I one of my buddies too, his name's Anthony Tolliver. He's an NBA player. He kind of wrote a little thing on the back of my book too, and he's married and has a great wife and a great relationship too. But he was basically said, you know, he's like, it does a great job of making this book relatable, and it's something that anyone can learn from, even if you have already found, quote unquote, the one. And so I think you're right, Andrew. I think guys should check out your book as well.
All right. Thank you. So for all the listeners, you can follow up with Kris Wolfe at goodguyswag.com. And Kris, thank you so much for being here on the show, sharing your story, being vulnerable, and imparting so many gifts here with my audience.
Of course. Thank you so much, Andrew. It's been a real honor to be on the show.
Thank you for listening to the Knowledge for Men podcast. Hundreds of interviews and 1 million downloads later, we're continuing to build an international movement, and we've just started. So if you enjoyed this episode, go ahead and leave a review in iTunes. It really helps to grow the podcast. Guys, 2015 is the official year of living with purpose, where every day you do only the things that matter to you. You wake up, live with purpose, and take massive action towards the life you want. Check out kfmfree.com to get free tools I've created to help you crush life. Again, that's kfmfree.com. This is your host, Andrew Farabee, and I'll see you in the next episode.